not.
No, I know it.
Huh? No, he's on the TIP board. He's probably on the IPA. I'm sure he is. He weasels his way into everything anyway. So. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor.
Good afternoon, Mr. Victor. How goes it today? I saw your brother on the weekend, actually.
Did you?
Yes. Did you see him?
You have my sympathy. I did.
Okay. No, I had to get a little visit with him, actually. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the regular scheduled meeting of Taber Town Council, January 28, 2019. Just for the record, both Councillor Firth and Councillor Garner have excused absences with today's meeting. We first have a subdivision authority meeting. I'd like to call that meeting to order, please, and ask for an adoption of that agenda, please. Councillor Tams.
So move, Mr. Mayor.
Motion on the table. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Good, thank you. Item number 3, Mr. Armfield.
Yeah, I'm going to call up Ms. Monks to introduce the subdivision that's the topic of a decision today, please.
Ms. Monks.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and members of Council. Administration has received an application for subdivision at 5061 41st Avenue. The current title for this site includes 3 lots. The applicant proposes to consolidate these 3 lots into one and then subdivide them to create 2 separate lots on 2 individual titles. The intention is then to demolish the existing home and garage on the lots and construct new homes on each new lot. The lots are currently zoned for R2 residential single and 2 dwelling district. The newly created lots will meet the minimum lot width and area requirements for any of the uses permitted on the lots. The application for subdivision was advertised in the Taber Times on December 26th and January 2nd. Additionally, neighbors within 100 meters were notified by a mail-out and were requested to respond by January 11 with any concerns. None were received. An internal circulation was also completed with that date, and again, no responses were received. The application was reviewed at the January 21st Municipal Planning Commission meeting, and a motion to recommend approval by the Subdivision Authority was made with the conditions identified in the package as recommended. Administration would seek approval of the Subdivision and Development Authority for this application. Thank you for your consideration.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Ms. Monks? Councillor Brown.
Mr. Mayor, I'm prepared to make a motion at this time
All right.
that the Subdivision Authority approve subdivision application TT 18-0007, lots 23-25, block 39, plan 57, 5T within southwest of quarter, section 32, township 9, range 16, west of the 4th, with the following conditions 1 through 7.
All right, thank you. Motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried now. So good, thank you. I just asked for a motion to close the meeting. Councillor Chavez.
Motion to close the meeting.
Motion on the table. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. And on to our regularly scheduled Taber Town Council meeting. Call that meeting to order and ask for the adoption of the agenda as presented. Councillor Tams.
Motion that we adopt the agenda as presented.
Motion on the table. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Item number 3, adoption of the minutes. Item 3.1, minutes of regular council meeting, January 14th, 2019. Mr. Armfield?
Yeah, the first item we have on this agenda is for council to consider adopting the meeting minutes from January the 14th. If there's any errors or omissions, please let us know and we'll correct those accordingly. If not, they're up for adoption.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Beckering?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Regarding Resolution 3, 2019, the water sharing agreement, the motion reads that was accepted by Council Tams for a friendly amendment. And I believe, Mr. Mayor, that should be changed a little bit. It said, I'll find it here, Mr. Mayor.
sharing agreement for information.
But there was a friendly amendment made by Councillor Strovos, I believe, regarding the principle. Is that correct, Councillor Strovos? And I believe the motion says, as reads, that the principle, there should be in principle. Should be changed, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, that's now if council would like to work that into the motion for adoption, then administration can make that change and consider those meeting minutes adopted. That in the resolution 3/2019 to change directs administration to send a letter for support for the principle of the agreement to and what was it? In principle? In principle. Support for in principle of the agreement. Support in principle. I believe there was just support in principle of the agreement.
Okay, so just to clarify, you're needing an additional motion to cover that?
Well, ideally, or if we can just bring it back at the next council meeting. I mean, that's probably just as clean, just to bring it back at the next council meeting. We can make that amendment. No motion is needed. We've got that recorded, and then we'll just adopt these at the February the 11th meeting.
Okay, so as far as accepting the minutes, how are we going to deal with that?
We'll just move on, and then we'll accept the minutes at the next council meeting.
Okay. So we don't need a formal motion because this is going to be changed for the next meeting.
Yeah, we'll change. Okay. We'll change these.
Okay, very good.
Great catch. Thank you, Councillor Beckery.
Perfect. Thank you. On to item number 4, business arising from minutes. There are none further. Item 4.1, Southern Tributaries Water Sharing Agreement. Mr. Arnfeld.
Yeah, based on the discussion at the January 14th meeting, we sent a request to the Tabor Irrigation District, and Chris Gallagher and an entourage is here. I'll let Chris introduce his guests if they come up to speak. And so Chris has been invited to council just to discuss some of the questions that council had on the water sharing agreement and the origins of it and the benefits to Southern Alberta in general. So Mr. Gallagher, if you'd like to step up, and ultimately the floor is yours. Council is probably going to ask a few questions. You can see that the questions are there. I believe you've been prepped on them, and go ahead.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council, for inviting me to come and address some of the questions and concerns that were brought forward. And thank you very much to Gary Scherer for preparing these and getting these to me. With me today, I've got the Chair of the Tabor Irrigation District, Mr. Mike Wind, and to my right is Director Don Johnson. So I've asked them on short notice to accompany me to make sure I'm not stepping out of line here on anything I say, and to support the initiative in principle. So
just to be clear, Mr. Gallagher, you're looking for both those gentlemen to be speaking also or answer some of the questions?
No, they're available at your convenience.
If need be. Okay, yes. Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Without further ado, I'll go straight to your first question. So the question was, the town of Tabor has senior water licenses. Will the town receive preferred water uses over junior licenses? So under the current priority system, Alberta Environment and Parks would quantify the water shortage, and if a senior license holder can demonstrate a realized water supply deficit, in other words, they don't have enough water to meet their needs, they can call priority. If this is substantiated by Alberta Environment, they would then, under the authority of the Water Act, start cutting off use of water, starting at the most junior, until the deficit is addressed. So in this case, yes, the town's senior licenses would be protected as more junior licenses would be cut off first. As shortages become more severe, more junior licenses would be cut off, or conversely, if rain comes, those that were cut off would have their supply restored. Under the proposed agreement, we would all reduce consumption during the irrigation season proportionally, taking advantage of the very large volume licenses of the irrigation districts to buffer the risk of damaging shortages. This would in turn reduce the risk of any calls on priority within the southern tributaries. Within the agreement, all signatories have equal priority to the available water under the irrigation district senior licenses. So we have very senior licenses, and so because we are reallocating basically the volume within that license, it falls under the seniority of our licenses. Okay. Any follow-up questions on your item 1?
Doesn't appear to be.
Okay, good. I hope I do a good job with this. Okay, number 2. When water rationing occurs, will all signatories within the agreement be rationed the same amount? It's a good question. They would all use the same proportion, but not the same amount. So I'll explain that. The proportion is a percentage reduction of the typical unrestricted irrigation use that will provide high confidence to supply. So let's say SMRIDs, that's the St. Mary River Irrigation District that we're using as our benchmark for this calculation. Let's assume their unrestricted allocation is 18 inches and it was reduced to 14 inches because of information they have that the water supply is less than what they hoped. So this results in a 22.2% reduction. All signatories would reduce their summer surplus. This is their summer water use minus their winter water use by 22.2%. So the 2001 agreement, and if you're familiar, back at 2001 there was a water sharing arrangement on a 1 year off basis. That would have required a 22.2% reduction on all town use. So the new calculation was developed in consultation with municipalities, including the town of Taber, to help protect base water demand for indoor and year-round industrial use. So those with a lower difference in summer minus winter use will have less reduction in their allocation. And obviously those that have more, that have a lot of big green lawns, will end up having to reduce a little bit more. So although we need water use year-round to complete the calculations, rationing under this agreement applies only to the current irrigation season. So any questions on item number 2?
No, I believe we can carry on.
So far, so good. So your question number 3 was the agreement talks about individual signatories being given different water allocations. When rationing occurs, how is this going to be assessed? So signatories will submit their water use records, and I'd like to thank the town for providing yours during the development phase. That was very helpful. So with those water records, we will calculate a rolling 5-year average use of water year-round. We will subtract the winter from the summer use and apply the reduction percentage that I talked about earlier to set your allocation. All municipalities will have the same calculation based on their prior 5 years' use. Note that the summer water conservation efforts in years leading up to a rationing year will actually result in a lower volume allocation, kind of rewarding every municipality for any water conservation measures that you already have in place. So any questions on number 3?
All good. Carry on, please.
So number 4, what is the current process used by the districts to impose water rationing with no agreement? Or are there bylaws within the district for this process? Well, yes. We pass bylaws setting the annual allocation for irrigators. We receive reports from Alberta Agriculture and Forestry that tell us how much water is available in each district's upstream reservoirs and the anticipated watershed yield from the snowpack. They use each district's crop mix and acres to estimate demand and calculate the equivalent inches available for different levels of risk. And they use inches because it's easier to figure out on the field and the way the irrigation systems work. They just convert it all to inches of depth on the field. So the agreement calls for a 90% confidence level, and that's the same level of risk that TID uses every year, plus a bit of contingency. Irrigators make seed and fertilizer decisions based on the allocation that we set. We do not ever want to have to go back to farmers to tell them prior to harvest that they have less water than we promised them. This confidence level would then be applied to all signatories with the shared proportion reduction. Municipalities benefit every year from the conservative bylaws that irrigation districts set. And that's prior to the agreement. So the agreement will allow residents then to participate actively every year in conservation measures, and for municipalities to gain recognition in their efforts to preserve water security and promote resulting continued economic development. Of great importance is that the region will have resilience to water shortages and that we cooperate and share water, not fight over it as winners and losers. We need water to grow our communities, and this is a sure way to show that the water supply is protected. So, any questions on number 4? I hope that.
No, thank you. Carry on.
Okay, number 5 and 6 I've kind of combined together in one answer here because they kind of overlap a little bit. But you've asked to explain the process when districts sell additional water allocations and why these allocations, why would these allocations be sold if water rationing is becoming a common occurrence? And then number 6 is, are the irrigation districts currently selling more water allocations than there is water, and how will this affect the town's allocation? Those are very good questions because you want to make sure that there's actually water available and we're not divvying it all up. So irrigation districts have water licenses that specify volumes of water for diversion. So our license with Alberta Environment says how much water we're allowed to take each year. And that's assuming that water is actually available to take. So each irrigation district has expansion limits that state how many irrigation acres plus terminable agreement acres we are allowed to have on our assessment rolls. So we've got a volume, and then we've got the number of acres we can apply that volume to. Over time, irrigators adopt more efficient irrigation systems, and irrigation districts install pipelines and irrigation control systems that conserve water within our own licenses. At our request, Alberta Agriculture and Forestry conducts extensive water modeling of our water use in the irrigation district and advises on what is the acceptable risk. So there are standards that are applied across all the irrigation districts on risk levels and appropriate expansion acres. If there is room to add irrigation acres within an acceptable risk, an expansion of irrigation acres using saved water is possible. So again, we're not enlarging our water licenses, we're using the water that's available to apply that same bucket of water on a larger number of acres. The results are reviewed with the irrigation district membership through consultation, and a plebiscite is set. A plebiscite to set the expansion limit and any conditions on that would be made. So in addition to our expansion limit, TID has an amended license allowing 8,000 acre feet volume of water to be used under water conveyance agreements for various other uses, including municipal, industrial, recreational, agricultural, commercial, habitat management, and other irrigation. So the town holds 4 water conveyance agreements with TID. One is simply to convey water under the town's license. So that's not coming out of TID's allocation. That's your own water rights, essentially. And we're just providing the service of delivering it to the town. The other 3 are under TID's amended license. These water conveyance agreements under TID's license is what is allowing the town to continue to grow and add recreational water features such as the new trout pond. That falls under the recreational water conveyance agreement. With access to TID's amended license, the town is in a very water secure situation, and TID has allocated less than half of the 8,000 acre foot volume under our amended license. So there's room to grow. The expansion limit and amended license volume are set to manage risk within the TID. We manage this well enough that we can share it. The water sharing agreement is a means of spreading the risk between all license holders in the southern tributaries so that no one is left dry. So it's important that you understand the limits that we set within our district, and then the license that are being shared all the way across the southern tributaries. So I'm hoping that answers your questions.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Beckering.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Gallagher, thank you for your presentation. To your knowledge, within the southern tributaries, are there any entities out there that are struggling with this water sharing agreement, or perhaps might not even sign it?
Well, that's a good question. For the most part, it's been actually almost exclusively, it's been very positive, and the intent has been there to participate. Actually, some of the reservations that you may have had occurred early in the process, and that's why we redid that calculation of summer minus winter use, and that was part of the town's efforts to protect that base water consumption. As far as right now, there are only 2 entities that have indicated some reluctance to sign based on what we have. One is the City of Lethbridge, and that's because only 4% of their water use is actually coming from the southern tributaries. 96% is from a different watershed. So I can understand them saying, well, why would we participate in this? So we'll work with them a little bit on that and see how we can work something out that makes more sense for their participation level. The other is the United Irrigation District, and they have a unique situation in having a significant proportion of their irrigation district not supported by upstream reservoir storage. And so we made the simple exclusion of that portion of their district from the agreement. So the water rationing conservation process would apply only to that for which they have the ability to manage. If they don't have the upstream storage, they're already rationing because they run out of water in a dry year because the river starts to run dry. So those are the only 2, to my knowledge, that have has expressed any reservations so far.
Sure.
Else? Councillor Bruin.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. We're talking now of conservation. How many acres have the districts increased in the last 10 years? How many more acres?
I guess it depends on which scale you're looking at. If you're looking at the Taber Irrigation District, we had our last expansion plebiscite in 2011, and it was an increase of 10,000 acres. And right now, or at that time, we were at 82,500. So at this point, we're at somewhere around 87,000 acres. So we've only increased about 4,500 acres. It's expected over the next several years, a lot of that remaining is going to be taken. There's been a lot of interest, especially with the announcements of the Cavendish plant and some rumors of other expansions going on. So there's a lot of demand for irrigation agriculture. But the major increases, you've probably heard very recently, Bow River Irrigation District had a large expansion. They have lots and lots of water available within their licenses that they haven't accessed. So they actually took what may look like a large expansion, but it's well within their ability to do that. The St. Mary River Irrigation District had their expansion in 2012, 13, somewhere. Maybe it was 2010, somewhere around the same, close to the same time TID did theirs, and it was a 40,000 acre expansion. But again, the prior time that they did an expansion was a significant amount, 15-20 years prior to that. All these expansions, you have to the irrigation district has to demonstrate the conservation of water first, and then the expansion is based only on the demonstrated saved water. We're not expanding and increasing risk. When we expand, we're just working our way back towards what was already an acceptable risk level. So we're playing with house money here, is kind of the analogy that I would use. It's a safe bet. We're not overextending our risk when we expand.
I think your float might be getting a little shy there, because all these acres you've expanded, I don't see any off-site storage created. Extra off-site storage. I think districts and the whole group as large have to start considering some more storage for this water. We keep expanding irrigation acres, and now we're starting to think we got to start conserving this water. We're kind of grabbing the ball before it went, or we should have done this a few years ago, I think. But like, how much more offsite storage have we created?
Increases in storage have been, there have been a few, not too much in our area that I can think of. Most of the increases in storage have actually been through operational changes and better modeling. There have been some other irrigation districts that have had increased reservoir storage. It's important to understand the distinction between the volume of water that's applied and the storage that supports it. Again, we're going back, if you look at it, it's almost like turning the clock back. We're still using the same volume of water. But what's actually happened is over time we're using less and less and less water, so that when we do an expansion, we're just going back to the same level of risk. And that level of risk, when they do the modeling, includes all of the storage systems, all of the reservoirs, as well as all of the conveyance systems, all the canals. That's already considered in the model, and there's no increased risk. It's just returning back to the risk that there was when it was initially set.
Thank you very much.
I apologize. I'm not doing a terribly good job.
I appreciate your answer. It's tough, but I think until we start looking harder at more reserves for water, like this expansion, to me, until we guarantee these acres we've already permitted, that we can continue to supply them with water, I think the irrigation districts have to look at how much more water they're allocating.
In terms of that, that's something I know TID, if you take a look back, going back many, many years, Mike's predecessor, Keith Francis, was a strong advocate for increasing storage, because what that does is helps us get through the lean years. And you take a look at some basins in the southern states, they're capable of storing up to 4 years worth of water. Our system is good for maybe a year and a half. We have different climate and different risks situation up here, but that's something that certainly anything we can do to support the growth of storage will improve our resilience and our ability to manage. And that's an important point too, because we've talked about this water sharing agreement is not intended to be a replacement for storage. In some ways, we're letting the Alberta government off easy with putting this type of an agreement in place, because it says, oh, well, we're not in such a bad risk situation during drought. But we need to continue to remind them, as a signatory of this agreement, that we're all advocating for improved storage and good management so that it reduces the risk for everybody. Good point. Thank you.
Councillor Beckering?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, Mr. Gallagher, I applaud irrigated agriculture for the huge efficiency you've created in the last 15, 20 years with your pipelines and your pivot efficiencies and more accurate measuring of water applied to the fields. Of course, there's a reason for that, because it costs money to put water in the ground, right? Just as an aside, though, I remember well the 2001 drought in the town of Taber, who's a relative minor player in the water use business in Sullivan, Alberta, very minor, did a good job. Symbolically at least, to cut back water in lawns. We had a lot of brown lawns in Taber. To my great surprise, there was a lot of big green lawns in the farms out in the country. Just a comment.
Mr. Johnson, you had a comment there? If you would want to step forward, if you would please, to the microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just in support of what Chris has been saying to Councillor Bruin, I think one of the things that needs to be recognized is exactly what Garth has just talked about, is the greater efficiencies. We were challenged a few years ago by the government to reduce and increase efficiency, actually to increase efficiency by 30%. We're close to 40%. So we far exceeded what the goal was. Part of that is the installation of pipelines that Councillor Beckering just talked about. As well, we continue to push. I sit on the Alberta Irrigation Districts Association. We have in the next month and a half. We're in the middle of some intensive discussions, and we've got a formal meeting just dealing with reservoir rankings and kind of giving us a direction in terms of expansion. One of the things we're looking at is for UID that Chris talked about, has no storage whatsoever, and they're proposing and putting forward a small reservoir that would assist them in that area, which would benefit the rest of us downstream by having that increased storage as well. So we continue to put that in front of the government, and we'll continue to advocate for that as well, not just with pipelines, but also the kind of equipment that our farmers are putting on with low pressure pivots, lower pumping costs with that, the ability through computerization to be able to control the amount of water in different parts of your fields. So there's a lot of progressive things that are being done in that area from our point of view in agriculture to be able to conserve that water. We go down to the States a year and a half ago. We were down in Yuma and had a look at there, and we were surprised they have absolutely no underground piping. And in a hot climate like they have, they're all open ditches, they're all open canals. And so we think that we're, based on our conversations with the Northwest Irrigator Operators, which is the four northwestern states in southern Alberta, we probably have the most progressive area, both with those guys, but also in Canada. And that's been demonstrated by a number of studies. And so I think it's really important that we have these conversations with you. So we thank you for the opportunity to come and discuss that. And we'll be more than happy to have you come and join us if you want to go on a tour sometime and see some of the stuff we're doing. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation. Appreciate that. Somebody prepared to make a motion. Councillor Beckering.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I'll make a motion that the council accept the material presented for information and thank the delegation.
Great, thank you. Motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried unanimously. Good, thank you. On to item number 5, bylaws. There are none. Item number 6, action items. 6.1, Council Direction Resolution 6, 2019, January 14, 2019. Mr. Armfield.
Yeah, we have a bit of a housekeeping item for council on this next agenda item. Councillor Beckering had proposed a motion that got carried at the January 14th council meeting that was actually impossible to carry through with due to the agenda had already been adopted for that meeting. The motion read that the discussion of the 1/3 federal tax exemption was to be discussed at that meeting. Are you ready, Ms. Van Ham? I've got actually the original motion that we had proposed as administration to be considered by council, and I'll just bring that up for council's consideration. We're ready? And so we're just seeking a discussion with council with regards to where you would like to take this. Our recommendation would be to actually rescind this resolution and then proceed forward with a resolution that looks similar to the one that we had proposed at that January 14th meeting.
All right, thank you.
So you can see on the north and the south screens here that was what administration had proposed originally on January the 14th, and then we just missed it with the motion that Councillor Beckering had proposed and then it got passed.
All right, Councillor Beckering, you all right with that suggestion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, when I read when I got my agenda sent to me the other night, when I read that motion that was moved by myself and carried by the council, I was somewhat nonplussed that this meeting was in there, because I don't think I said that. I think my intent of the motion certainly was to bring it up to be discussed at a further meeting, exactly as Mr. Armfield just quoted. So I have no problem with rescinding this motion, Mr. Mayor. I'll make the motion to rescind this particular resolution.
All right, thank you. Motion on the table. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Good, thank you.
Now we need a motion.
we would need another motion, exactly. So someone prepare to make the next motion. Councillor Beckering.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make the motion then that, could you bring that up, Mr. Armfeld, what you had proposed? Because that's exactly what I was trying to get at there.
Yeah, so that is exactly the proposal that was made on the north and the south screens.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, I'll move then that in consideration of bylaw 20-2018, council intends to bring back the matter of the 1/3 federal tax exemption changes to council remuneration, with a 2/3 majority recorded vote for a closed session discussion at a subsequent council meeting.
All right, motion on the table. Any further discussion?
What date are we going to have that then?
The plan was for February the 11th, when all council is here. Yeah.
Okay, motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. All right, on to item 6.2, communication survey report. Mr. Armfeld.
Yeah, so there's a couple items coming here, and yes, Brendan will be coming up to present both of these. The one is a comparison of our communications feedback that we've had from 2017 to 2018. There has been some improvements with how our residents have felt that they've been engaged, and so we wanted to share that with council. So I'll leave that here with Ms. Brennan to start this one off, please.
Good afternoon, Council. It's my pleasure to present the final report on the 2017 and 2018 communications survey, which were released to the public in their respective years. I especially want to highlight that in light of the communication plan being crafted in 2018, I chose to prioritize that plan and kept the 2018 results until this report. So this is the first time that the 2018 public survey results are being released, and the 2017 report was provided to the previous council in a different report. So with that note, the intention of these surveys are to take a brief snapshot of the public's thoughts on our communications. While the results are not definitive, they do allow us to garner valuable feedback from the public. I'll caveat my entire presentation of the findings by saying that while we received more responses in 2018 than 2017, the numbers only represent 1.2% of the entire population of Taber. With that, I'll present my top 3 statistic highlights just so we don't keep you too long with this. So from 2017 to 2018, there was an increase of 6.92% to the respondents who agreed they felt well informed about the Town of Taber operations, which is good news, but this is tempered with a decrease of 7.1% to those who strongly agreed. So there's a bit of a shift down the scale, if you will. One of our largest decreases was in the council meeting question CM1, where there was a decrease of 36.2% for those who agreed they felt informed about council meeting and decisions. And this is going to take a lot of work to change, but I think we're on the right track with the inclusion of your Coffee with Councils and the live streaming that we're currently doing. I think that'll go a long way in helping the residents of Taber feel more informed about what goes on in this chamber. And finally, my third highlight is the overall satisfaction for those who responded very satisfied or satisfied with overall communications decreased 27.7%. So while these numbers are disappointing, I think it's useful to see them as an opportunity to improve our processes. I state on page 75 that there are always more improvements to be found in failures than can be found in successes. So I take the attitude that this feedback is an excellent opportunity to reevaluate what we're doing and where we can be better for our citizens. So what are we going to do with these results? And by we, I don't just mean me, I mean the entire town of Taber. So council will find within the pages quite a few initiatives that were done in 2017 and 2018, and those will be carried on into 2019. I'm not going to go over every single one just to save time for you, but some notable initiatives included the new website, an increase to our social media presence, and a few council-led initiatives that I've previously mentioned. We're also working more with local and regional media to give them more information and to advertise with them more. So I thank the relationships we've been able to construct with our media on that. And the results of these surveys are used to edit and inform the communications plan. So when the annual review comes for the plan in the summer of 2019 and subsequently, we can reevaluate the appendices and add initiatives to match up with the public's expectation, as we've seen through this report. So in closing, I'd just like to take this opportunity to highlight everyone within the town of Taber who are there in the trenches doing the work that I get to communicate to the world. They're the ones making my job easy. Each member of staff are the ones doing the excellent work. I'm just the lucky one who gets to show that to the world. So while there is criticism in this report that will help us improve to serve our citizens better, the compliments and kudos within really belong to the town of Taber administrative staff and the council, who give me thousands of ways to tell the people of Taber that we really are a great place to grow. So with that, if council has any questions within this report specifically, I'd be happy to address those.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Ms. Brennan? I just had one, just an observation. I know historically we've had difficulty getting participation with any survey. But I think the 10% range was fairly common there for most surveys we've done in the past. This 1.2 is low, right, as far as an actual participation. I just a question is there anything you think that there's something more that we can do to try to get that participation up out there to have a broader range of what the actual thoughts of our residents are?
Absolutely. So I did a lot of searching as to surveys because it was very low. And being that it's only the second time this survey's been released, statistics have proven that the more times you do the surveys, more people will participate because it comes to the forefront of their mind that it's going to be kept done. So I think the third year we'll just keep seeing the increase of participation. My plan for 2019 now, it's still being finalized, of course, but we'll be doing a lot more advertising of the survey. I'm considering having the survey go for longer than just a month. There's a number of different initiatives we're going to be working on to get more people involved, and those will be coming here because it's usually May that I release the survey.
All right, and just roughly the length of time that it should take to complete that survey is how long?
When I put it out, it usually says 20 minutes, but SurveyMonkey tells me that it takes people about 5 minutes to complete.
It's good to know. That's pretty reasonable. I'm just wondering, just off the top, Mr. Armfield, is there something that we could do to for a summer student program type of a thing to do this type of a format similar to like the census? Actually have somebody going door to door? Would that be a potential option to get those numbers up for participation?
Yeah, that would be an option to have somebody go door to door to do a hand survey. I think I would like to just have it in Ms. Brennan's hands to come back and make a proposal for kind of what she would look at it for the full suite of getting some more interest in it. But certainly going door to door would be an option.
Okay, just to me, like I said, I mean, it's I appreciate all your efforts, Ms. Brennan. It's difficult when somebody's not helping you out, meeting you halfway to do what you need. So that's why I'm asking if there's something that we should be doing in that regard, because 1.2% is very low, and so I don't. That's highly skewed as far as the actual results we're likely to get for a larger scope of participation. Councillor Beckering.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree the 1.2% is very low, but is it common for a survey percentage like 1.2 of the entire population to be that significant a number? Because I would suggest to you that probably 1/3 of the people at the town of Taber are below the age of 15 that have no cognizant awareness of any survey of any kind. So why would you do that?
So I will say that we did. I'm assuming you're referring to sort of the electronic where we have an older population. Am I understanding?
No, I'm mentioning this particular reason for a survey of 1.2% of the entire population, when we know darn well that there's a certain percentage, I'm guessing 1/3 perhaps, that are not cognizant or aware or even participating in a survey, even if you knocked on the door.
Again, I can't speak to making and forcing people, of course. But I do think there are some initiatives that we can certainly use, as Mayor Prokop mentioned, to increase that 1.2%. It's a struggle, of course. We see that with our public participation, getting people to join in. Mayor Prokop's absolutely right. They have to meet, the public have to meet us a little halfway. But we do use other means. The survey is certainly one of our feedback responses. We have other means as well to getting feedback from the public.
All right, thank you. Any other questions for Ms. Brennan? Someone prepared to make a motion? Councillor Thames.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I move that council accepts the 2017 and 2018 communication survey report for information.
Motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Brennan, for your report. On to item 6.2. 6.3, communication plan, 6-month reports. Mr. Arfel.
Yes, and for council's knowledge, this one comes out of your strategic plan. In your strategic plan, there was to be a 6-month review of the communications plan to do a check-in. You can see that Ms. Brennan has a fairly extensive task of duties associated with what her plan is to engage the citizens of Taber. And really what this means to me is an opportunity for council to give Ms. Brennan or administration some redirection on that plan, or to ask any questions about the details associated with what she's working on, how you feel that people are being engaged. If you have any other suggestions, now would be the time for that sort of discussion.
All right, thank you. Any other questions, comments? None whatsoever. All right, someone prepared to make a motion. Councillor Bruin.
Mr. Mayor, I can make the motion that council accepts the communications plan 6-month report for information.
Give a motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried unanimously. Good, thank you. On to item 6.4, disposal of municipal documents. Mr. Arfel.
Yes, I'm not sure who's coming up to Ms. Phillips. Okay, to look after this one. So according to the FOIP Act, one of the good things actually according to the FOIP Act is that there's a legislated process in place for the destruction of old documentation in a municipality, and so we are looking to get council's blessing on following through on the destruction of those documents that are just taking up room in our files right now. Ms. Phillips, if you have anything to add to that, please go ahead, or if council has any questions on that matter.
All right, thank you, Ms. Phillips.
Attached, there's a list of documents for 2011, so we're just looking for approval on the destruction of the documents.
Okay, that's pretty straightforward.
Yes.
Any questions whatsoever for anything that's on that itemized suggested list? Councillor Bruin.
Mr. Mayor, I prepare to make a motion that council approves the destruction of documents identified in the attached list per the retention period in years identified in Schedule A of the bylaw number 10-99, retention of municipal documents.
Motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried unanimously. Good, thank you. Item 6.5, finance timeline overview. Mr. Arfel.
Yeah, so Mr. Orwa, if you'd like to come up. After the last budget cycle and conversations that you and I have had, Mr. Mayor, we thought it's fitting just to put together a bit of a timeline for council to see how different points of the year, what those different points of the year mean to our finance department. Like everything in the municipal environment, we really run off of process, and they're either linear processes that we just repeat and repeat and repeat, or they're cyclical processes that we just repeat and repeat and repeat. And Mr. Orwa's department is really driven by cyclical processes. Each year, preparing the budget and approving the budget, and then doing the year end, and the next step is doing the assessment, and then collecting the taxes and spending the money, and then hitting repeat. So we really wanted to just convey that to council in another way, and just to hopefully provide the opportunity for some discussion and to enhance the understanding of the process that happens in the finance department. So with that, I think I'd turn it over to you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Orwa, to have a discussion, and if there's any questions on this item at all.
All right, thank you, Mr. Orwa.
Thank you very much, members of council. So I do have the finance overview. So this is just a flow of what happens around the fall, September, all running throughout the year. And you can see from September, that's when we begin our operating and capital budget. That's where we start planning, the long-range planning takes place, and, we define all those goals and objectives, especially now for the next 3 years as required by MGA. Then from September to November, that's when we have various meetings with the department heads, and the presentation to council goes on through there. So it is during that time when things like amendments of the current year would take place, budget narratives where the departmental heads comes in to explain. Lots of discussion takes place there. And that's also when we have our utility rates, all those, the fee bylaw comes into place because it's part of the budget. Then also around that timeline, that's also when we have the preparation of the supplementary tax notices. Those are just for the new developments completed within the tax year. And then thereafter, we start preparing the quarterly financial statements, of course, which flows through to the audit committee, then finally to council. Now, that takes me down to December now, when we have the operating and capital budget now presented to council. Now, I might take that final back, and I'll put it somewhere else, but the first budget goes through by end of the year. Now, from January to February, now that's when the year-end process begins. And this is now when we have the whole idea what has been happening throughout the year. Now we start looking at the reconciliation of all the accounts. We start looking at our TCA, which is the tangible capital asset. So we look at all our additions. We look at what we are going to dispose. And then we come with the final number, which will show us the net book value of what we have for the whole organization. And then it is at around this time of the year where we do the funding for all the projects from the previous year, where we look at all the projects we said we're going to do, and we look at the ones that we're going to carry forward if at all we don't complete them. At the same time, we also look at the savings that we have from the reserves. If we said we're going to spend X from our reserves and we spend Y, we see the variance. This is the time when we look at those things. Now, it's also the time of the year where we also look at the preparation of the T4s, of course, through payroll, the pensions, the pension adjustments. This is the busiest time of the year, especially for the payroll department. And then from there, again, we start working on the preparation of the year-end financial statements, which again flows through the audit committee, then finally to council for approval. Now, once that part is done, then somebody has to come to check us out whether we did the right thing. I said I was going to do this, but they'll tell me whether I did the right thing or not. And that's where the external audit comes in. So around March this year, it will be from the 25th to the 28th, the external auditors will be here to look at our books, to make sure that what we've been saying throughout the year is correct. The questions that I've been getting, whether the town is financially sound, will now be taken into consideration when they're looking at some of these areas with some post-audit adjustments. Then from March to April, that is now when we have the tax season again begins. So the tax assessments start coming in. Like now, I think we already have the residential and the farm assessments in. I think M&D is in. We're just waiting for the linear and the DIPs, that is the new ones, which we're going to explain at length in a minute. And then it's at this point again where we now bring in the presentation to council on the mill rates. Are we going to decrease our mill rates? Are we going to increase our mill rates? What are things that we need to put into consideration? Again, preparation of the quarterly financial statements again is presented for that particular year. Then when we come to May to June, again the tax collection begins. So already the mill rates are out, so things have been sent out there, so we begin collecting our taxes. Then from July through August, again start looking at purging our documents, moving some documents to storage, again preparation of financial statements, so the cycle continues. And then at the back of that timeline, I did put in some tax and assessment information there. Those are just some information that should help us to understand the season where we're getting into. Looking at things that we can control and the things that we cannot control. Like things like, the education requisitions and all those things. Those are things that we can't control. But there are others that we can control. And I've also given some definitions of some of those aspects. But before probably we get some questions, I would like to concentrate on some few implications of the season that we have now, which is March to April, because that is the longest, that is where we set our mill rates, and that's what will have impact on everything throughout the year. So putting this one together, as I told you earlier, we do have, I had requested our assessor to always be around on Mondays within the building to answer any questions to do with assessment, to do with anything to do with taxes. And that is going to continue throughout the year. So either for the administration or any council member that might be here on Monday and wants any question answered, our assessor is always in-house on Monday. Now, the major implication that I want us to look at so that as we get into the mill rate season is, what are some of the implications? So we've put a 2-page report here that is going to help us. I'm not going to give you all the meat, just the soup for now, and prepare as we prepare for the mill rates. Now, what would happen if at all we decided to leave our rates the way they were? What is the impact? What if everything remains flat? What will be the impact? Then we start looking at, with our increase in revenue, the 2% increase in revenue, what impact will that one have also in terms of the assessments? Looking at some of the numbers that we have ready here, it looks like residential and farmland assessments is almost flat. Now, if it is flat, what does that do to the mill rates? Now, when I look at the non-residential, there is a slight reduction in non-residential and M&E. So when there is a reduction, of course, in assessment, and we want to retain the same revenue that we had, chances are that you're going to increase your mill rates. And if you don't increase your mill rates, then the other option is to cut down expenses. So I just want us to go through that small exercise as we prepare for the next session. And I think at this point, I would also invite, is he here? You can join me. So that he walks us through the assessment, because he's done the assessment for not only here, but so many other municipalities. I think it's still this. Just go to, I just want only the 3 pages prepared, page 3 and page 5 should be good. Yeah. Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Orwa. Mr. Mayor, members of council, I've been asked to brief council of the impact to the year-over-year change in the assessment base. I think this year it's great to start the conversation a little early because it is distinguishable from previous years. Whereas we're looking at an assessment base that typically increases due to market change and assessment growth, but this year it looks like it's starting to tip the other way. What I'd like to do is run you through 2 pages. The first page is the impact of year-over-year assessment changes to tax rates, assuming that tax policy stays the same. So, for example, you're still taking as a percentage the same amount of taxes from your residential and your farmland versus your non-residential and your machinery and equipment. And then the second page I want to take you through is how does that look now under the 2019 budgeted revenue. So the first one will be a revenue neutral calculation. The second will be under the 2019 budgeted amount. So on the top of the page here, you'll see these are the numbers from the 2018 tax rate bylaw. Previously, the residential and farmland made up about 69.5% of the assessment base in Taber. The remainder, of course, 30.5% to non-residential and M&E. With respect to your tax policy, roughly 59.2% of the tax levy is coming from your residential, whereas about 40.8% of the taxes are coming from your non-residential and M&E there. So as I mentioned, if we keep your tax policy the same, i.e. keeping the percentages for both residential farmland, non-residential, and machinery and equipment the same, and the revenue neutral, or the revenue stays the same, so i.e. you're taking in the same amount of dollars here, what would be the impact to the mill rates under a situation where the tax policy stays the same and your revenue stays the same? However, your year-to-year assessments are going to change. So last year, as you see here at the top, the residential and farmland assessments made up roughly $714.2 million. This year, the overall change is going to be a slight increase to $714.3 million. The overall market change in the residential did go down. However, it was in part covered by a lot of growth. So overall, the market is down a bit. However, there was a lot of assessment growth in the base. Therefore, the overall change is very minimal. If we keep the tax policy and the revenue neutral, or revenue the same, you're looking at a very minor decrease on the tax rate, mill rate, from the previous year, right? So the assessment base goes up slightly, therefore the mill rate would come down for you to take in the same amount of dollars. On the non-res, there is a bit of a caveat here. The linear assessments and the non-linear DIP assessments, as prepared by the provincial assessor, have not come in yet. The linear assessments will be in on the 31st of this month. The non-linear DIP will be in on the 28th of February. I anticipate this number to go down. Assuming that that number stays the same, we are looking at an assessment base that is decreasing. So year over year, we're looking at roughly a decrease of minus 0.74%. So again, keeping the tax policy the same and the revenue the same, that would mean an increase in the tax rate of a positive 0.74%. So you're going from 11.8458 to about 11.9337. So this again is under a revenue neutral calculation. To demonstrate the impact, here is a typical residential property experiencing a typical change, right? The typical 0% change. And this just demonstrates that under the previous mill rate and the previous assessment, in comparison to the new assessment under the new mill rate in the revenue neutral calculation, you're looking at a 0% change. So that just demonstrates that, yes, we are dealing with a revenue neutral situation, and applying those mill rates to the properties that have experienced typical growth in the town of Taber, you should have a 0% impact on these properties. But the intent here is just to show you how that changes that mill rate year over year as your assessment changes. If we move now to the 2019 figures.
If I can interrupt, but we did not have a revenue neutral 18 to 19, correct? We had a 2% increase from 18 to 19.
Yeah, that's correct. So this one here, Mr. Armfeld's right. We don't have a revenue neutral situation. I like to show the revenue neutral calculation because it really demonstrates the impact of the assessment base and its impact on what it does to the tax rate. But we don't have a revenue neutral situation. What we have here is an approved 2019 budgeted amount of $9,327,771. So I believe that's roughly a 2.3 or 2.4% increase from last year's figures. Under the same circumstances, so we're using obviously the same assessments in the previous page, and of course the same tax policy. All we've done here is we've inserted now the budgeted amount of 9.3. So again, just to recap, the assessment base, residential farmland goes up slightly, non-res M&E goes down slightly, but under the new revenue, the impact to the tax rates on the residential side would be a positive 2.37%. So the mill rate would move from 7.5574 to 7.7362. And on the non-res side, you're seeing an increase of 3.13%, going from 11.8458 to 12.2169. Now, using the new calculated mill rates on the same two properties experiencing the typical change, you're going to get a year-over-year change in these folks' taxes of that 2.4% per year. Moving forward, of course, once the linear values come in, once the nonlinear DIP come in, these numbers will be finalized so council will have a better idea of where the assessment base is going. I think at this time it's important to give you the heads up that certainly on the non-res and M&E side, this will be the most difficult part, because I do anticipate this number coming down, which will put upward pressure on that mill rate. Any questions?
All right, thank you. Councillor Beckering.
Mr. Mayor, Lance, what's DIP mean again, please?
Designated industrial property. So it's your linear accounts, your facilities that are regulated by the AEC and the AUC. So those would be like your electric substations. There's some well sites. There's railway and your gas separator buildings.
Mayor, as a follow-up, the provinces or assessors now do that, correct?
Sorry, say that?
The provinces does the assessment on those.
They do. There's about 12 or 13-ish counts. They're very, very small. The province does the assessments on those. The sugar factory, I had anticipated that to be a major plant under the regulations and fall under DIP. That is not the case, and we have not applied to put that as a DIP. So that is, of course, the responsibility of myself to prepare that assessment still.
Any other questions? Mr. Armfield.
Yeah, so the purpose of bringing this to council's attention is because we are seeing some slippage in the value of those industrial properties, specifically the commercial and industrial side. And the conversation was when we set our budget in 2019, going back to the 3-4 split vote and acceptance of that 2019 budget, there was a 2% increase in expenditures there. So your administration is quite cognizant of the fact that when this mill rate is finalized and these percentages are looked at by council at the end of March, beginning of April, when we set the mill rate, that they could be beyond what is palatable for an increase to this council with regards to setting a tax rate for 2019. So we are looking at ways to amend that 2019 budget to bring the tax rate change more in line with inflation. So traditionally, that's where Tabor has set its tax rates directly in line with inflation, if not a little bit ahead of inflation, but not much. And looking at the value drop in particularly in the commercial and industrial side, we're pretty cognizant that we may have to rework those 2019 numbers to meet council's goals. So we wanted to start this conversation with council early and to have a good level of understanding with council leading up to that decision point at the end of March. And this is why we're on this path early rather than late, and why we are working in order to see where we could do some trimming to that 2019 budget, that if we do get the direction towards the end of March to do some trimming to the 2019 budget, we're ready to do so to bring those tax rates in line with inflation.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Beckering.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I very much appreciate the presentation from Mr. Orwell and Mr. Lance and what Mr. Armfield just said. I really appreciate that we're looking at this early enough, I think. I'm not surprised at the numbers. I think it's a general malaise in the province regarding industrial and commercial that there is a decrease in assessment, certainly not an increase. So I don't think we should read a whole lot into it locally.
only thing that I would like to add there is on our tax policy. Remember, I mentioned this one here late last year when we were looking at the mill rates. This tax policy here has been in existence for a very long time. That split, and I also want council to take a look at it and see if at all maybe they want to either flip or do something about this policy, or just let it stay the way it is. But the way it is now, the split is 59.2% to residential and farmland, and then 40.8%. So in terms of tax levy, this is the breakdown that we have, and that policy has been in existence for a very long time. So if we want to maintain it, that's good. If we want to change it, this is the time to change it.
Thank you, Mr. Oro. Just a question. What would some of the other comparisons be out there for, say, our neighbors, Coaldale, Lethbridge, etc.? That percentage.
We are working on that one right now with
Okay.
Lens, and in the next presentation, we are going to give you different tax policies and how they work them out alongside with comparison with the mill rates as well.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
For
Any other questions?
Yeah, for council's consideration, Act 2 of this that we're bringing to council is looking at a piece of property that has a particular value, a structure on that property that has a particular value, and then machinery and equipment in that building that has a particular value, and then comparing that across between Tabor and Lethbridge is what I've given direction on. But we certainly could include, once we build that model, we could probably include Coaldale, because you can see that there's a significant economic development consideration to all of this, that if the ratio is more punitive to industrial and commercial developments, they may choose to go to another municipality than choose to come here. So I want council to be cognizant of that too, that not only is this a way that we create revenue year to year, but this is a way that we actually create assessment by attracting more development into the municipality by playing with that ratio.
So ideally, we should be on an equal playing field with other.
Well, we don't want to be in an equal playing field. We want to be a little bit better.
Oh yeah, okay, fair enough.
So,
but at the very least, we don't want to be higher.
That's right. That's
exactly.
correct.
Yeah,
That's correct.
okay.
So you'll see a presentation coming at the next council meeting, or the one following in February. I guess the next one is February. And to have that conversation, really to just prep council for that big decision that's coming in March about what do we do with this potential increase in taxation or cutting the budget.
Okay, very good. Any other questions, Councillor Beckering?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would suggest, though, Mr. Whaley can probably answer that a little better than I'm just assuming here, but I think for a population of its size, Tabor has a tremendously large industrial base compared to its residential. Is that correct?
30%, off the top of my head, it seems like it would be a little higher. Off the top of my head, I know the town of Red Cliff is a little bit lower, and their ratio is a little higher. Like they like to tax the non-res, they're a little higher. I think it is. Yep.
So, Mr. Mayor, my comment regarding that would be then that, of course, whenever you change the tax policy regarding non-residential and industrial, it would have a significant effect on the residential if you would decrease the industrial.
And to add on that a little bit too is, depending on how the assessment bases change, year over year, if it's not looked at annually, you look down the line 5 years, all of a sudden the value of the non-res could be much different. And so it's very important to look at that on an annual basis and make sure you're competitive with other municipalities, for sure.
All right, fair enough. Thank you. Any other questions? All right, someone prepared to make a motion? Councillor Bruin.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make the motion that council accepts the finance timeline overview presentation for information purposes.
Motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried now. Good. Thank you. Item 6.7, Sierra County proposed memorandum of understanding. Mr. Arfield.
Yeah, late in September of 2018, we had a delegation from CA County, Kenya come and visit Tabor and southern Alberta and a number of municipalities and join us at the AUMA convention. With that, the intention was to create some sort of memorandum of understanding between our two municipalities for how we could work together to enhance both municipalities moving forward. We have received that memorandum of understanding, and we've put it in this council agenda package for council's consideration. So we're opening up that discussion for council to provide administration with some feedback on that we could take back to, say, a county or however council wanted to proceed.
All right, thank you. Any questions? I'm going to suggest something. This is a pretty important document overall, and I think in all fairness, this is one of those things where we should probably have all 7 councillors present before we're making any final decisions. And so that would be my recommendation if everybody else is all right with that suggestion. Councillor Becker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree very much with you, and I guess I'm prepared to make a motion to defer this to the 11th of February. Not table it, but to defer.
Sure. All right. Is that fair enough, Mr. Armfield? Can do that easy enough?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
That's fine.
So we do need that motion in that regard?
Please, yes.
All right.
So I'll make the motion that we defer the memorandum of understanding till the council meeting of 11th of February.
All right. Motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried unanimously. Good. Thank you. On to item 6.8, policies proposed for repeal. Mr. Armfield.
Yeah, so we're continuing to work on the strategic plan. Within that strategic plan, there was a direction to look at a number of the policies that we have in our books that are obsolete, that we don't use anymore. So Ms. Van Ham, through the Administrative Services Department, has had a good look at policies that we still had in place that are obsolete, and so we've brought those back for council to consider repealing them. We don't operationalize these anymore. It was a good direction in that strategic plan to do a little housekeeping, and so we have brought that back for your consideration to do that.
All right, thank you. Any questions? Councillor Towns?
Mr. Mayor, can we cover this with one motion, or do we need to have 7 different motions?
Mr. Armfield?
Okay, I'm getting direction that Ms. Van Ham ideally would like to have seven different motions. And I can understand that, as each policy itself was duly passed through a motion, that to repeal each one by a rescinding motion is the right way to go.
Sure, there's short motion recommendations, so sure. Councillor Towns.
Well then, Mr. Mayor, I'll move with the first one. I read this and I could chuckle over some of them that there even existed on our books. So I make a motion that council repeals Guest of Tabor parking permit policy C46-62491.
Motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Next motion. Councillor Towns.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I move that council repeals the use of town logos policy 42C52890.
Motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried unanimously. Good. Thank you. Item number 3.
Mr. Mayor, I move that council repeals smoke-free Tabor facilities policy C45-12593.
Motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried unanimously. Good. Item 4. Councillor Towns.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, move that council repeals proclamations request policy 34C17587.
Motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried unanimously. Good. Thank you. Item 5. Councillor Towns.
Mr. Mayor, move that council repeals policy handbooks for council policy 20C-305/81.
Motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried unanimous. Item number 6. Councillor Towns.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I move that council repeals idea of the month policy 88S-10197.
Motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. And item number 7. Councillor Strauss.
Your Worship, the residency requirement policy, I think we should defer this to the next council meeting, February 11th, when all councils are here as well.
All right. Fair enough. And we're all right with that? So we would need that motion in that regard then also, Mr. Armfield, correct?
Not necessarily. We can just put this one back on the council agenda package for the next meeting. Yeah. Yeah.
All right with that? Okay. All right. Fair enough. Thank you. On to item 6.9, Taber Police Commissioner Report to Council. Mr. Armfield.
Yeah, so as the Secretary of the Taber Police Commission, bring this report forward for Council's consideration. If you have any questions on the contents of it, I'd like a motion to give me direction to go back and get that information. I can get it from the Police Commission. I don't really like answering those questions though on my own. I'd like to get them straight from the source.
All right, thank you. We do have 2 commission members here, so I'm sure if there's any questions, we could probably direct them to those members also. Any questions whatsoever? Someone prepared to make that motion? Councillor Bruin.
That council accepts the Taber Municipal Police Commission report for information.
Motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried unanimously. Good. On to item 6.10, department reports. I will go through those individually. If there's any questions, just stop me accordingly, please. First one is the HR activity report. Water and wastewater treatment report. Engineering and Public Works report. Fire Department report. Recreation Department report. Planning Department report. CAO activity report. Administrative Services report. And Finance activity report. With that, someone prepared to make a motion? Anyone? Mr. Downs.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I move that council accepts the departmental reports for information.
Motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. On to Mayor and Council reports. Councillor Beckering.
Mr. Mayor, nothing to report except the usual meeting attendance.
All right, thank you. Councillor Towns.
Mr. Mayor, nothing to report other than the usual meeting attendance and just a wonderful job that our town employees are doing removing the snow this year.
All right, thank you. Councillor Strauss.
Yes, Your Worship, I attended the Natagawa meeting, and I probably made mention of this before, but you know, it's proceeding along very well, and we've got a great group of kids, more than we can handle applying. So hopefully this coming year that we host the delegation. When we go back next year, I hope the mayor and some of the other council members and administration would certainly keep that on their agenda for going over to Japan for our 40th, for our preliminary for 40th anniversary.
All right, good. Thank you, Councillor Bruin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Basically, the usual meetings I've attended. I've attended one in Edmonton, the AUMA Police Act Review Committee. It's very worthwhile, that one, I thought. AACP and the AAPG were discussed, and I think that was a very valuable meeting, so I'm looking forward to the next one. And just cover a few other events I attended in the community this last month. It's great to see town coming out supporting these events that I attended, and everything is going on track in my book.
Great, thank you. And for myself, yes, it's been a fairly busy month as always. A couple highlights for me: I did attend the Chamber of Commerce Awards banquet night. That was very well done, very well attended, and very nice evening all the way around for all that attended there. Also attended the Beet Growers Banquet Awards night recently as well. It was also a nice dinner and awards presentation. So that would be about it for me overall. So somebody prepared to make a motion to accept those reports. Councillor Beckering.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move that council accepts the mayor and council's report for information.
Motion on the table. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Good, thank you. And just one more standing item, council requests. Councilor Chavez.
Your Worship, I have a couple out of our coffee with council. There was a lady that brought up an interesting position on our spray park of adding a water table to it for the use and for younger kids to use, that they can fill up their buckets and throw them around and whatnot. I think that would have some interesting. It add an interesting corner to our spray park over there. She indicated that they do go to Coaldale, where they do have one of those, because for the little kids apparently it's a real enjoyment.
Yeah, just a question with that. I also echo that same sentiment, and I think that would be a great idea. That young lady did have a photo for us, and it was Coaldale. She compared, right? It was the actual location, and she threw out a figure in the, I believe it was a $1,500 range. Was that correct for that particular item? So, any other thoughts for anybody that was there? I think it's something that should or could easily be added. And Councillor Bruin.
Mr. Mayor, I support, like what Joe said and yourself, that the recommendation the lady brought to the meeting there is kind of interesting. Give the younger children something to do while the older ones were still running around. And from what I've looked at, it would look to be a fairly simple add-on. I think it's something we should maybe direct our recreation department into looking into, to see about a water table and what it would cost to put one in. And I'm suggesting a separate pad, not on the pad we have now, but just off to the side. So,
well, sure, I guess you could suggest that, but I think that's up to our recreation department to come up with that best suggestion as how to place it, or whatever the cost might be, etc.
I would think that the most desirable spot they'll find.
Sure.
Our spray pad itself is fairly well used, so we haven't got a lot of extra room there.
I guess the one other thing she did bring up also was a joint, I guess it's a swing, right? Kind of a adult and child swing.
Yes.
So I've never seen it personally, but she didn't have a picture of that. But
what it is, Mr. Mayor, is that an adult can swing with a child in front. So you're looking at your baby as you're swinging, and it's quite easy for the child. And it's something we may want to look if we develop anything different in our new park.
I just wonder if that's something we just ask to add on for to look into that as a possibility somewhere over the place, not necessarily the spray park area, but somewhere in the park there. Councillor Chavez.
Yeah, Worship, where we talked about that was in behind the administration building here in the park renovations, is where something like that could be quite feasibly located.
So we would need a motion on that to suggest those two items, Mr. Armfield, correct? Somebody want to make that motion related to those specific items? Councillor Bruin.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we direct Recreation Department to look into a water table. I quote, it's called a water table, to incorporate into our Tabor Spray Park to find out how much it would cost and the proper location for such a little venue. But I think it would be very good addition to the spray park.
And or the swing.
And do you want a second motion for the swing? There's swing or all in one?
Can be included, I think. Yeah.
Okay. I'd also, with that motion, like to include that we look at the options of putting a. I don't know the proper term of this swing. That's the problem. It's I think recreation department. Yes, some look like
child adult joint swing.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of like a. Yeah, you know what I mean. Okay. The camera sees it. But something like that, if we could look into that in our next phase, if we develop any more on the parks, it would be something to see nice. It would be nice to see something like that there.
Are all those gestures clear enough for Ms. Van Ham as far as putting that on paper for the motion? Okay. Councillor Becker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not speaking against the motion at all, but I wonder if the Recreation Board is being circumvented here.
Pardon me?
I perhaps should have suggested that we ask our CEO to direct our Recreation Board to do something.
Oh, okay, sure. I guess that's the usual format, right?
Well, we're breaking new ground here because we're getting some information out of these Coffee with Council meetings that is valuable, and picking up tips from the citizens that they would like to see, and then, you know, and now how do we operationalize, right? And so essentially that's council's direction to us. Certainly could go back to the Recreation Board for a conversation. There'll be a capital cost to both of these items, and is that something that the Rec Board would like to see in our parks? They usually are the organization that vets these sorts of recreation capital expenditures. So I think Councillor Beckering's suggestion is a good one, that we swing this past the Rec Board to get their support and their direction on it before.
Absolutely, I think there's input that needs to be done. Those are simply a citizen's suggestion, and we didn't think it was unreasonable. But if there's something problematic with either of those items, or something in future down the road, for sure we need to hear that. And maybe there's a reason why others don't have it. So for sure, yeah, we need some input from our expertise in the Recreation Department as well. All right.
So as the motion stands, using the technology that we have, can we bring this up again here? And just to give council the benefit of perhaps amending the motion that's on the table.
Just to be clear, that's absolutely correct with what Councillor Beckering suggested. It's always direct administration, not anybody specific, right? As far as to look into that item or matter, whatever's on the table. Councillor Bruin.
Mr. Mayor, may I, before we pick it apart, just Council directs the Recreation Department to look into a water table to incorporate into the Tabor Spray Park and investigate the cost and proper location. I don't think I need to add into there. I think it's a good addition.
The Recreation Department probably should be adjusted also to administration.
It directs administration. Yes, let's cross out Recreation Department and directs administration to look into the water table to incorporate into Tabor Spray Park and the cost and proper location. And also include looking at the options of putting a child, adult, and also we look at the location and at options of putting a child, adult swing in our next phase if we develop into the parks.
Okay, you comfortable with that?
I'm open to any amendments. Maybe instead of if we develop into more parks, into future development of parks. Maybe what I would add there.
All right. Any other comments, suggestions? All right. With that motion on the table,
I would just out of a query then, is there a timeline when council would like to have this brought back? And administration would be bringing this back to council. We would not be bringing this back to the Recreation Board based off of this motion. So if there is a desire to direct this to the Rec Board, it should be enshrined within this motion. Otherwise, your administration is bringing this back to council.
Mr. Bruin.
At this time, I'd like to bring it back to council. I think we can make this decision.
Councillor Stravas.
I would make a friendly amendment that council directs administration to have the Recreation Board look at this matter.
Councillor Bruin, accept that friendly amendment?
I'll accept that.
All right. amended motion on the table.
The only, if I may, Mr. Mayor, the last sentence of my motion there, as we develop more parks instead of if we develop more parks.
Okay, once again, amended motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried unanimously. Good, thank you. Councillor Strauss.
My second thing is I've had some feedback from individuals who work across the other side of 64th Avenue in the industrial section up there, and they have a concern with getting across 64th Avenue as the traffic speed there is 60 kilometers from 50th down to 36th. And they're saying that sometimes there's heavy traffic and moving quite quickly. And I told them I would bring it here to council, and perhaps we can make a motion to refer that to the traffic committee to take a look at that as well.
Just again, Councillor Strauss, where is that?
This would be from people coming from the south side of, well, not the south side of town, but from town going across to the industrial section where signpost guys are, the Safe House, Baker Hughes.
Highway 36 to 50th Street.
Right, yeah, to look at that section, not the whole 64 section, but that section alone, to reducing the speed limit or doing something in order to facilitate people crossing that. As that area expands, it's getting to be more difficult to get across that because the high traffic times are, of course, in the mornings when people are going to work and whatnot, and they say it's difficult to get across 64th Avenue.
All right, so Councillor Strauss, we just need a motion to go forward with that to the traffic committee.
If the council agrees with it, I'll make it. Yes, okay, then that council directs administration to look at the speed limit across 64th Avenue from 50th Street to Highway 36 with the traffic committee.
All right, that covered the basis, Mr. Armfield. All right, okay. Motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried now. See, good, thank you. Any other standing item requests? And there was nothing else outstanding. There were some things that were still in the works, correct? But there's nothing that we're having to make a motion on today that was outstanding.
The major item that was outstanding we actually have for you in closed session. It has to do with budget implications. So we have that for you in closed session. Yep.
All right, fair enough. Anything else? Okay, moving on to delegations. There are none. Next is meeting inquiries. Tabor Times, Trevor.
Sorry, just a question for Councillor Strauss there. You're talking about 64th Avenue, referring to vehicles or pedestrians crossing.
No, it's vehicles trying to cross from 52nd Street, 56th Street, trying to get across to the other side where they work. That as that area is growing, it's more and more difficult for them to cross 64th Avenue.
Okay. Yeah, I just
yeah, they're in vehicles crossing that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, that's got it covered, Trevor. Okay, perfect. Thank you. I just need a motion to go for the 30-minute break then before we go into closed session. Councillor Beckering. Motion on the table. All in favor? Carried now. It's good. Thank you.
Nice.